you don't really want to get up and do the talking part, um, you can put the suggestion out there. So that's where this came from. So if anybody has something, you could throw it up there, and we'll see how it goes. But so we're back to spiritual but not religious. Shorthand in my writing here is that I refer to it as CBNR. I did it because I got tired of typing it. So if I say the CBNR, that's what I mean, because when I'm rereading this, sometimes I stumble over the words. And to start off, I wanted to say that I always kind of thought this statement was like a subtitle for all UU organizations. Spiritual but not religious is kind of us, the truth seekers. And I'm sorry, where's Libby? First slide. Thank you. That's just our menu for the day. But okay, but getting back to the general topic of spiritual but not religious, figure it's Sunday morning. Everybody likes Sunday morning math, so we're going to start off with some numbers here. There was a survey done. They talked to 2,000 people. In 2017, it was the Public Religion Research Institute. They found that 18% of Americans identify as spiritual but not religious. By contrast, 31% of Americans identify as neither spiritual nor religious. The spiritual but not religion folks tended to skew younger and be a bit more educated than Americans associated with a religion. 40% holding at least a 4-year college degree and 17% having some form of postgraduate education. So this is just the puff ourselves up and feel great and superior and everything. And surprisingly enough, also aligned with the UUs, we tend to be more politically liberal than our religious counterparts. 40% of the spiritual but not religion identify as liberal, compared to 24% of the general population and 27% of the neither spiritual nor religious group. Okay, next slide. Back one. Sorry, there you go. Okay, what is it and what does it mean? This could be a great day today. The term itself really explains it all. In the search for our truths, our own feelings of greater power and or influence in our lives and thoughts and deeds, we do have a source of purpose, a wonderment of the world around us, seen and unseen. It just isn't controlled or forced through the strainer of an organized religion. Getting back to the survey, and this is one that I specifically had to put in for myself. The study found that the single greatest spiritual experience for this group was not prayer or meditation, but music. 71% of spiritual Americans reported having been inspired or touched by listening to a piece of music in the past week. So that's 71% compared to 43% of the non-spiritual respondents. So the UU board can expect a request for a doubling of my salary as a musical director for all the leadership I do. Folks who follow the spiritual source have a reasoning for what happens and why. And for this, the best experience example I can find is my own feelings. And I want to make a statement that what I'm saying is not a refutation of God, of the one power who controls and creates everything. It's, in my mind, it's much more identifying what we are referring to as the one power who controls and created everything. My truth is science, cosmology, evolution, the relativities. If I needed a supreme being, it would probably be, next slide, Albert Einstein. The math of science is generally unimpeachable. I know there's disagreements on both sides, but that's okay. I like what I see. What was before the Big Bang? Nothing, everything, we have no idea. What was before God and the Genesis creation? Nothing, everything, and we have no idea. So I do know that there are new thoughts and theories that question some of the older science, but that's just the way science is. Excuse me. In the past, things that weren't understandable were the realm of the gods, small case g. And as our knowledge was added to and human experience expanded, many magical, mystical things became explainable by science. We no longer require exorcisms to remove demons because we now know about germs and viruses. And we really know a lot about viruses after last year. But to really explain my own feelings of the spiritual nature, I'd like to go back to the afternoon of 9/11. I was working at GE Capital in Kings Mills, and like so many other places, the TVs were turned on and we watched the footage again and again. And at one point, management said, you know, you guys don't have to hang around here. Nobody's going to do any work. So if you want to leave, you can. As I was heading out, I found that my spouse, my late spouse, was still at work and they weren't being released. So the last thing I wanted to do was to sit on the couch alone, watching more of the same news over and over and over again. So while working at GE, I would drop down to the Little Miami bike trail at the Peters Shot Tower and walk. That would be my lunch routine. I took that option hoping it might clear my mind a little bit on September 11th. At one point, I came around a corner and spooked a group of small herons that were on a tree over the river. Next slide. Yay! They called and flew off as one body, not wanting anything to do with me. I just stood there looking at where they had been. They didn't care what those stupid humans were up to. They didn't care if we all killed each other. The basic nature of the world, the universe, would continue regardless of our actions. So it was an extremely calming spiritual moment that has really stayed with me ever since. So this is kind of what I see as being the spiritual part without the shackles of organized religion. So that's good for us. An interesting side note is that many spiritual but not religion people still maintain an unofficial connection with their earlier religious experiences. It kind of breaks down interestingly because 18% of the SBNRs still kind of identify as Protestants and 18% identify with the Catholic Church. So I was thinking that would probably make us spiritual, but mostly not religious. Okay, next slide. The origin of the phrase. To break a spiritual but not religious designation down really requires just looking at the source. Traditionally, spirituality is linked to a central God or the Holy Spirit branch of the Christian trilogy. Next slide. Merriam-Webster shows spirit as an animating or vital principle held to give life to physical organisms, or a supernatural being or essence, i.e. the Holy Spirit. The word origin of spirit is in Latin is spiritus, meaning breath or breathing, which it was usually referred to as an external source of energy. If we're looking at the Christian description, we trace the origin of the Trinity as a combination of God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. It wasn't explicitly spelled out that way in the New Testament, but around the end of the first century, this combination of religious powers kind of congealed in the leading rulers of the religion, and that kind of put the spirituality part as a major tenet of Western religion. So for a lot of people, the SBNR designation is rooted in a disdain for organized religion. It's on that pesky organization part. Especially here in the States, we have always leaned into selecting and rejecting different parts of the religion we are most closely aligned upon. It's been referred to quite often as the cafeteria of religious beliefs. We go through the line, pushing our tray down the shelf, saying yes to the mac and cheese, but no to the prune whip. Now we're getting a little aside here, which you all probably would expect from me anyway, but a lot of you probably have no idea what Prune Whip is. It's a concoction of whipped cream and pureed prunes. Next slide. Yes, a president playing golf. Who could believe that? It actually was supposedly one of President Eisenhower's favorite treats. It actually is a purplish mound of awfulness. In junior high, we would always pick one tray, and that was the receptacle for this abomination. Oh, eep, there you go. Sorry. So we'd end up with like this, maybe an 18-inch mound of this ugly purplish stuff, and put it back in the cafeteria, and we, on the tray return, just kind of to give the cooking staff our opinion of what this was like. Next slide. It's truly awful. So this is one of those things, sorry, I have to say, some memories just never go away. For every image of birds in nature, there's also always a Mount Prune Whip. Okay, so now let's get back to the talk. Next slide. I didn't want to leave that stuff up there too long. We put Ike up twice. So I couldn't leave it. Oh, there it is. Now back to the cafeteria. This pick and choose method can lead in some folks to a strong belief in God or Jesus, but throws away the filtering required for the strict rules of the organization. Next slide. Oh, somehow you're ahead of me. The term spiritual but not religious sort of started its common usage in the 80s and 90s. In some circles, it was attributed to the AA 12-step program. And as more and more people joined Alcoholics Anonymous, they were resistant to the religious facet. The definition of the higher being was expanded. B.J. Gallagher, an inspirational author, says 12-step people have a brilliant spiritual community that avoids all the pitfalls of organized religion. Each recovering addict has a God of our own understanding, and there are no priests or intermediaries between you and your God. It's a spiritual community that works. So another force, there were more forces, of course, that kind of pushed this as an option for folks. And a lot of it had to do with distancing themselves from the organized religions of the time. One of the biggest, at least that I remember, is Ronald Reagan and the affiliation that kind of built over time of the religious right. Next slide. For Reagan influence, he was the first big TV star candidate. He was well known for being on the air Sunday nights for years before most of you were born, telling stories of the Old West and pushing borax, a cleaning additive that was kind of the mid-60s version of OxyClean. The religious right attached themselves to President Reagan as bringing religion back to the front. Originally, a lot of the religious right was tied to the Roe v. Wade, but it took a while before Roe v. Wade became such a big issue with them. One of their primary forces, of course not publicized, was segregation. In Reagan, they found someone like them who wanted a business-driven ecology and societal segregation. The second part is not always known or shared about, but there recently were some tapes released from the Nixon White House tapes. And I actually did hear this tape because I wanted to make sure it was legit. But following the UN vote to recognize the People's Republic of China in 1971, there was a taped call between President Nixon and Ronald Reagan, the governor of California. The US wanted to block China, but the UN voted to include them. During this call, Governor Reagan can be heard comparing the delegates from the African countries. He compared them to simians who aren't really used to wearing shoes. Now, I was a little shocked to see this actually, that he was that bold about it, but About this time Reagan was elected to president, the religious right was pushing to return to the old ways, God and country, looking back at these good old days. This was the birth also of a large audience, give all your money to God and me groups that stormed their way into cable television. Next slide. And I did think it was funny because in looking for pictures of Jim and Tammy, this picture came up on the Televangelist with Toupees website. So Jim and Tammy Baker, Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, all became larger and richer than life with the start of the very conservative American evangelicals. This group of people would match right up with their present rush to change the voting laws, 250 plus state bills in the last month to basically suppress the minority and poor voters. Now, another topic that kind of pushed this spiritual but not religious was the baby boomers. It's something they picked up. So that also in some cases, I mean, even though I was born in arranged, it kind of also put another slight negative connotation with organized religions. The boomers more or less got mixed up with the New Agers. Folks looking to distance themselves from the religious right and looking for new and exciting routes turned to New Age camps. Again, this group was sort of looked down upon by the religious leaders of the time. Next slide. Here's a description from the time, from the 80s. New Agers and other unaffiliated spiritual seekers often appeared in the mainstream press as vapidly self-absorbed spiritual mall rats bent on paving the road to self-actualization and spiritual fulfillment with a steady stream of crystals, God's eyes, aromatherapy, colon cleansers, sage wands, mindfulness meditation retreats, and on and on. That's a lot of words to say that the SBRNRs weren't really worth a damn. Now, an interesting fact here, again, getting back to my musical background, is that one thing I noticed in the 80s and the 90s that kind of brought these groups together is that neither the evangelical right nor the New Age baby boomers contributed to any decent music in the 80s and 90s. Now, a plus for the boomers led to the increase to the SBNR movement is the societal changes they believed. The powers of New Age folks was in questioning. Most questioned everything, trying to determine what is actually happening rather than just accepting because religion. There's an old Buddhist saying, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. The reason is that if you meet the Buddha, if you think you've found all the answers, it's actually time to start questioning. And another push for the SBNR movement comes down to what they refer to as the picture analogy. Experiencing events can sometimes be very spiritual, while religion can be more of an explanation of the event. It's like seeing a picture of something versus seeing the actual thing. Next slide. Now, this is really bad because this is like we're looking at the wrong side of the thing, but it's easier to get a picture of the ocean than find an actual ocean in Ohio. So hold your coffee cup up to your ear and listen to the waves. Okay, next slide. So this is kind of the arguments against, arguments against being spiritual but not religion. And of course, they all mostly come from organized religions. It was hard to find non-religious arguments against this just because it's their very nature to want to proselytize and get more people into religion. So according to the politically incorrect guide to Christianity, there is a being in this universe who is spiritual but not religious. Satan, being a fallen angel, is a pure spirit. Now, I thought that was a bit harsh, don't you think? But I can't tell you how many videos I watched the first 5 seconds of researching this topic, because Then it became very obvious it was a organized religion backed notion. Next slide. Now, some pundits have very strong feelings about the whole SBNR designation. One of the most common arguments deal with the word spiritual. And this battle kind of moves it more into semantics and theology, but the use of the word can only be related in their minds to the Holy Ghost. We're back to the Trinity from earlier in the talk. This designation has come under a lot of fire from official religious spokesfolks. Lillian Daniel, pastor of the First Congregational Church of Dubuque, Iowa, suggested that spiritual but not religious followers are shallow and narcissistic. David Coleman, a religious scholar and author, says, the most inclusive of sects, SBNR appears to shelter nouveau Buddhists, 12-step adherents, lapsed Catholics, non-observant Jews, people who burn incense, and others that just don't, like how negative atheism sounds. So to be a bit of concern, the increase in SBNR folks consider it a bit of a threat to the organized institutions. But there are other arguments that pop up against the use of spiritual but not religion. There actually is a feeling that SBNR, like the teaser for this week's talk that was online, is just an excuse for people that don't want to get up on Sunday mornings and go to church. They find a nicer way of saying it so they don't look like lazy bums. Another side of the anti-SBNR folks is that when you say I'm spiritual but not religious, or even more so, my spirituality is very private, it's thought that what you're really saying is, I don't want you talking to me about it. I don't want people scrutinizing my faith, because if they do, I'll have to scrutinize it too. And I may discover that my spirituality isn't all that deep or coherent or integrated with the way I really live. Furthermore, if I have to start actually declaring what I believe, I'll be held accountable by what I say. I'll have to actually behave accordingly. I did see another interesting statement dealing with this aspect of the SBNR question. The thought is stating that organized religions bring people together for various reasons, but this communal sharing of ideas reinforces the statements of the church. By sequestering your religion in your own head, you don't have that kind of weekly nudge to think and do what is asked by a religion. The thought is that if you want to be spiritual but not religious, you have to stop and think, meditate perhaps, as to how you act upon your spiritualism. If you don't reinforce your spiritual existence, it becomes just a word used to keep people out. This lack of inner reinforcement is one of those thoughts that goes back to the earlier statements that some people refer to themselves as spiritual but not religious just because they don't want to say they're atheists. Next slide. Okay, I want to check where I was. The arguments for being spiritual but not religious. Spiritual experiences are felt to be truer or more real. They aren't run through the rule book of a religion. You can experience something without having to then explain how it falls into which book, which chapter, and which verse kind of thing. Next picture. The actual experience is something very personal to you. Religion tends to distort events through the minds and writings of thousands of other people's experiences. It's kind of like a 2,000-year-old game of telephone. And the commonly used excuse in that area is that the Catholic Church, in the First and Second Lateran Council in 1123 and 1139, that was when it was officially decided that priests were explicitly forbidden from marrying. So if you're calling the shots, you have permission to discard the gray and fuzzy stuff if it's your own, if you're spiritual but not religious. B.J. Gallagher, we heard from a little bit ago, in the Huffington Post blog, says she's SBNR because organized religion inevitably degenerates into tussles over power, ego, and money. And to back this up, she tells a real short parable. God and the devil were walking down a path one day when God spotted something sparkling by the side of the path. He picked it up and held it in the palm of his hand. Ah, truth, he said. Here, give it to me, the devil said. I'll organize it. So getting back to the throwaway atheist reference a bit ago, spirituality comes from our own source of guidance, energy, and science. So in effect, it is a way to express what drives you without needing to associate with any god, gods, or goddesses. It also lets you blend in other beliefs in a more meditative source like Hindu or Buddhism. The rise in secularism and science-based beliefs described can explain our existence. No God created us. Nothing that we do or have become is controlled by the heavenly God, call it the shots. In argument, often religious groups point to the fact that humans are where we are in the universe today, that this is proof that God built this all for us to be here, to be the absolute apex of the universe and the top being. And so it's kind of justifying our existence. The more secularist view is that we're here on this planet at this time because this is what life evolved to. We're here and we don't have anything else to say. If you look at the possibility of life on other planets, the odds are much higher that they will end up like our friends or foes from science fiction, or the lizard people living under the Denver airport and Area 51. Next picture. So I am kind of claiming a first here in Harmony that we have back-to-back pictures of Gandhi and Zoidberg, but that's neither here nor there. Next slide. Okay, so we're finally to the getting near the end here. I can see we're running out of time. I talk too much. Most of us go to church as consumers, not communers. Receive the service being provided and leave. We have little sense of living out the gospel together day by day in the world. Our souls struggle on a spiritual vacuum that renders those experiences we do share rote, unreal, or superficial. So we're so many in the same boat anyway. I watched a video by Vishuddha Das and liked the message he gave. It lent itself to what I was looking for this talk. He is a Buddhist, which is more a way of life than a religion. And he kind of had his own feelings on the difference between religion and spiritual. He says, to visit holy places is religious. To practice holiness for yourself is spiritual. To recite prayers in a temple is religious. To develop a prayerful heart is spiritual. Wearing rosaries, beads, certain clothes is religious. Decorating your inside with quality values is spiritual. So at this point in our lives, the hard part is not the identification, it's just figuring out exactly what we believe. We owe ourselves that much. We can't run around saying we're spiritual and not take a minute to understand what we mean by spiritual. Declaring ourselves as merely spiritual means we haven't given enough thought to what we hold as true. How can we declare that we believe in a spiritual self without understanding what that spirit self means? So there's many different ways in which people interpret any one religion. We do not need to commit to a certain sect, denomination, or church in order to be religious. It's kind of like reading Shakespeare. 10 people can read it and 10 people are going to come around with the slightly different variation of what's happening. And none of them are wrong. We can be what we choose without throwing ourselves into the catch-all of religion. Some compartmentalized can be helpful. It gives us parameters. We can find what works for us without Frankensteining our own religion together. Defining ourselves as religious only means defining our own concept of religion. We have that freedom. The beautiful thing about it is that no one, no matter what they say, is an authority on it. It's for us to decide. And that, geez, I'm sorry about the time. We don't have long to discuss, but that's the end of the talk.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Harmony UU podcast. Check us out online at harmonyuu.org for more details. You can also find us on Facebook. Just search Harmony UU. If you're in the Cincinnati area, please stop by one of our services on the first and third Sunday of each month at 10 a.m.